The morning of January 26, 1945, was cold, brutal, and unforgiving. Snow blanketed the frozen ground of Holtzwihr, a small village in the Alsace region of France, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath before the storm. Then, out of the tree line, they came. 200 German soldiers, supported by 6 Tiger tanks, advancing in a coordinated assault designed to crush what remained of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. Most men would have fallen back. Most men would have run, but Private First Class Audie Leon Murphy climbed onto a burning M10 tank destroyer, alone, and decided that today he would not move an inch. This is the story America has half forgotten. The story of a boy from Texas who became the most decorated American combat soldier of the entire Second World War, not through luck. Not through circumstance, but through an almost incomprehensible combination of skill, fury, and unyielding courage that left even hardened veterans struggling to find words. This is the story of Audie Murphy, and why his name deserves to echo through history with the same reverence we give to the greatest warriors this nation has ever produced. To understand what happened in that snow-covered field outside Holtzwihr, you must first understand where Audie Murphy came from, because where he came from made what he did even more remarkable. He was born on June 20th, 1925 in Kingston, Texas, the 7th of 12 children in a sharecropper family so poor that hunger was not a visitor in their home, but a permanent resident. His father, Emmett Murphy, eventually abandoned the family, leaving Audie's mother, Josie, to hold together an impossible situation with nothing but love and exhausted hands. When Josie died in May of 1941, Audie was 15 years old. He placed his younger siblings in an orphanage and began trying to enlist in every branch of the American military he could find. The Marines rejected him. He was too small, too young. The Army paratroopers turned him away as well, citing the same reasons. He was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed barely 110 pounds. He looked, by all accounts, like someone's kid brother, the boy who should have been home doing schoolwork, not asking to be sent to war. But Audie Murphy had something that no recruiter's checklist could measure. He had hunger, not just the physical hunger of a Texas sharecropper's son. A deeper hunger, a need to prove that this boy from nowhere, this boy with nothing, could become something. In June of 1942, at 17 years old, Murphy finally succeeded in enlisting in the United States Army. After basic training, he was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, a unit that would become one of the most battle-hardened divisions in the entire European theater. The men who served in the 3rd Division called themselves the Rock of the Marne, a name earned in the First World War and a reputation they would spend World War II defending at enormous cost. Murphy would fight alongside these men from the beaches of North Africa all the way across Europe to the borders of Germany itself. His first taste of combat came in North Africa in 1943, and even then, something about Murphy set him apart. He was a natural marksman. He had a product of years spent hunting game in the Texas countryside just to put food on the table for his family. What had been survival as a child became lethality in war. He was calm under fire in a way that unnerved even experienced soldiers. It was not the coldness of a man without feeling. It was the focus of a man who had made his peace with what war demanded and refused to flinch from it. By the time the 3rd Infantry Division landed on the beaches of Sicily in July of 1943, Murphy had already proven himself. Through the brutal Italian campaign, through the grinding, blood-soaked advance up the peninsula, Murphy fought and bled and watched men he cared about die. His closest friend, Private Laddie Tipton, was killed when he was lured toward a group of Germans who appeared to be surrendering. Murphy never forgot that moment. Some who knew him said he never fully recovered from it, but he pressed forward. By June of 1944, as the world's attention focused on the monumental landings at Normandy, the 3rd Infantry Division was fighting its way through Italy, preparing for another amphibious assault. On August 15, 1944, Murphy landed on the beaches of southern France in Operation Dragoon, part of the Allied push to open a second front and drive northward through France into the heart of occupied Europe. The campaign through southern France was savage. German resistance was organized, determined, and dangerous. Every town, every ridge, every river crossing was contested, and Murphy was always at the front. In September of 1944, near the village of Cleury in the Vosges Mountains, Murphy performed one of the many acts of individual courage that would mark his war. Now pinned down by enemy fire, he moved forward under withering machine gun fire, eliminated the German crew, and turned their own weapon against them, allowing his unit to advance. He was promoted repeatedly, from private to corporal to sergeant to staff sergeant, rank flowing to him not because of connections or time served, But because in the chaos of combat, men naturally followed him. He seemed to know what to do when everyone else was uncertain. He moved when others froze. He led when others looked for someone to follow. By the time the autumn of 1944 gave way to the brutal winter of 1945, Murphy had already been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and multiple Purple Hearts. He had been wounded multiple times and returned to the line each time. The 3rd Infantry Division had pushed northward through France into the Alsace region, a stretch of territory along the Rhine River that had changed hands between France and Germany so many times that its identity was a wound in itself. In January of 1945, the Germans launched a major counteroffensive in the Alsace, Operation Nordwind, in the aftermath of the larger German push in the Ardennes, known as the Battle of the Bulge. The situation for American forces in Alsace was precarious. Units were stretched thin, winter conditions were punishing, and the Germans were pushing hard. On the afternoon of January 25, 1945, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment occupied positions near the small French village of Holtzwihr. Murphy's company had been reduced by weeks of combat to a fraction of its authorized strength. But what should have been a force of around 200 men was down to perhaps 40 or fewer effective fighters. They held a thin line in the snow, exhausted, cold, and outnumbered. German commanders knew the American positions were weak. They decided to exploit it. The morning of January 26th began with artillery. German shells fell across the American positions, churning the frozen earth and forcing men into cover. Then, emerging from the Forêt de Riedvier, the forest that ran along the edge of the open fields near Holtzwihr, came the German assault force. 6 tanks, 200 infantry. Moving with purpose and coordination, the Germans advanced across the snow-covered ground toward the American line. Murphy ordered his men to fall back and take cover in the trees. He got his company's supporting tank destroyers on the radio, and trying to coordinate a defense. But in the chaos of the assault, one of the 2 M10 tank destroyers supporting his unit was already burning, hit by German tank fire. Its crew bailed out and scattered. The second M10 had also been ordered to withdraw. Murphy was effectively alone in the open, with the German assault bearing down on him. What happened next has been described, retold, analyzed, and still manages to seem impossible. Murphy grabbed the radio handset from the burning M10 tank destroyer. He climbed up onto the hull of the vehicle, which was wreathed in smoke and flame, its ammunition potentially about to cook off in an explosion that would kill him instantly. He manned the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on top of the vehicle, and then alone, Audie Murphy began to fight 200 Germans. He called artillery fire down on his own position, directing American shells to land so close that they fell within yards of where he stood. He used the .50 caliber to cut down German infantry advancing across the open field. When German tanks maneuvered to flank him, he shifted fire, called more artillery, directed more shells. The smoke from the burning tank destroyer provided some cover. The cold air smelled of cordite and burning metal and blood in the snow. Murphy stood on that vehicle for approximately an hour, fighting alone against the German assault, directing the fire of his artillery support with controlled precision while simultaneously working the machine gun until the barrel was hot and the bodies of German soldiers were scattered across the ground in front of him. A German officer later stated that the American soldier who stood on the burning vehicle had appeared almost supernatural, moving calmly, shooting with terrible accuracy, refusing to die. The German advance stalled. Soldiers who had expected to overrun a weakened American position instead found themselves being cut apart by a single man who seemed to have made a decision that the line would hold here, today, and that no force on earth would move him from it. When the .50 caliber finally ran dry, Murphy climbed down from the burning M10, which was moments from potential catastrophic explosion, and walked back to his men. He was bleeding from a leg wound he had received during the fighting. He gathered his surviving soldiers and led them in a counterattack against the disorganized German force, pushing them back toward the forest. He was on his feet, directing men, exposing himself to fire, moving through the battlefield as though the bullets themselves were reluctant to touch him. By the end of the engagement, the German assault had been completely broken. Murphy's citation would later note that he had killed or wounded an estimated 50 German soldiers in the fight. The actual number may have been higher. What is not in dispute is that the line held, that the German attack was defeated, and that it was defeated largely because one man decided it would be. When news of what Murphy had done reached higher command, the recommendation for the Medal of Honor moved quickly through the chain. General Alexander Patch, commanding the 7th Army, reviewed the citation. Officers who had seen difficult fighting across multiple campaigns described Murphy's actions as among the most extraordinary individual combat achievements they had encountered in the entire war. On June 2, 1945, 3 weeks after Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, VE Day, Audie Murphy was awarded the Medal of Honor by General Alexander Patch in a ceremony that should have filled every newspaper in America and every history book ever written. He was 19 years old. But Audie Murphy's story does not end with the medal. In some ways, the end of the war was where a different, harder battle began. Murphy returned to the United States as the most decorated combat soldier in American history. He had received every decoration for valor that the United States Army could bestow, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts. He had earned Belgian, French, and other Allied decorations as well. His photograph appeared on the cover of Life magazine in July of 1945, that open, almost startlingly young face looking out from beneath a soldier's cap, a face that seemed entirely too young to belong to a man who had done what he had done. Hollywood came calling. He made films, including the autobiographical To Hell and Back in 1955, in which he played himself, a film that became one of the highest-grossing pictures in Universal Pictures history at that time. For many Americans of the post-war generation, Audie Murphy was a genuine hero in an era when the word still carried full weight. Children grew up watching him. WWII veterans recognized something true in him, but behind the quiet eyes and the slight Texas drawl was a man in tremendous pain. Murphy suffered from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, a term and a diagnosis that did not exist in the form we understand it during his lifetime. He had nightmares. He kept a loaded pistol under his pillow. He slept with the lights on. He talked about the men he had lost, the things he had seen, in terms that made clear the war had never really ended for him in the places where it mattered most. He became one of the earliest and most prominent advocates for veterans' mental health at a time when such advocacy was difficult and culturally fraught. He spoke openly about his struggles at a time when men, especially soldiers, and especially decorated heroes, were expected to absorb their wounds in silence. He died on May 28, 1971, when the small private plane he was traveling in crashed into Brush Mountain in Virginia during bad weather. He was 45 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, where his grave has become one of the most visited in that hallowed ground. The headstone is simple, as he likely would have wanted: rank, name, the dates of a life that burned intensely and briefly, and the indication for those who stopped to read it that the man buried here received the Medal of Honor. The most visited grave at Arlington, after that of President John F. Kennedy, belongs to Audie Murphy, and still, somehow, his full story feels underknown, feels half-remembered, feels like something that should be spoken about with far more force and far more frequency than it is. Because what happened outside Holtzwihr on that January morning in 1945 was not the action of a superhero from a comic book. It was the action of a real human being, a boy who had grown up with nothing, who had lost everything that mattered to him before he was old enough to shave, who had been told repeatedly that he was too small, too young, too poor to matter, and who responded to that message by becoming something extraordinary, not to prove a point, not to earn fame, but because the men beside him needed him to, and because somewhere inside Audie Murphy, there was a thing that would not break. He held off 200 Germans alone, on a burning vehicle. In the snow, at 19 years old, he called artillery down on himself. He stood his ground when every rational calculation said the ground could not be held, and then he walked away, gathered his men, and counterattacked. Remember his name, say it clearly: Audie Leon Murphy, the most decorated American combat soldier of the Second World War, a son of Texas sharecroppers, a Medal of Honor recipient, a broken and brilliant and profoundly human man who chose, at the moment that mattered most, to stand rather than run. History owes him that, at the very least, and we owe it to ourselves to remember that heroism is not born in wealth or comfort or certainty. Sometimes it is born in a frozen field, on a burning tank, with nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. That is where Audie Murphy found himself on January 26, 1945, and that is where he became immortal.